Welcome to the Create More Value podcast, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, the boutique shareholder value improvement advisory firm. Create More Value is a series of conversations with senior executives, board members, investors, and other experts that have overcome challenges to create exceptional value for their companies. There are many ways to drive value, so we cover a wide range of topics. I am the host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. I would like to welcome my very good friend, Dr. Alise Cortez. Thank you, Alise, for joining me on our Fortuna Advisors podcast, Create More Value.
It's great to be with you, Greg. Thanks for having me. And it's great to be on the other side of the mic.
Yeah, it's a good point. A few years ago, you interviewed me.
Did.
Dr. Cortez is the Chief Ignition Officer at Gusto Now, a human and organizational transformation consultancy specializing in unleashing business results by igniting and growing high-performance teams passionate about delivering on the organizational mission. The resulting rewards, higher engagement, performance, innovation, retention, customer delight, and thus profitability. Dr. Alise is also an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, which I had to look up, by the way. She's an inspirational speaker, researcher, author, and host of the Working on Purpose podcast, where I joined Alise as a guest in late 2021. And she is bent on awakening people and organizations to their passion and purpose and inspiring them to make a contribution worthy of their one precious life. She is the author of 4 books, including, I have it here, including The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. She is focused on raising the game of organizations and individuals to live and work with gusto, step into their purpose to realize their potential, and make the impact they crave that betters the world. I guess like many other that have a corporate finance background, discussions on purpose are often full of, or seem to, at least to me, to be full of empty platitudes and lofty but vague ideals. One of the things I really like about your work is how practical and tangible your ideas are. Maybe we can start with an overview of what you do with your clients.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So what I really come to recognize, as an organizational psychologist is I love the world of work. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm an organizational psychologist because I believe in the wonder of work and the capacity for business to really do business that betters the world. And so what we're focused on here is really helping organizations to activate meaning and purpose in their cultures and their leadership. And we have a way of consulting to be able to produce that. And so that's really the bottom line focus, is really helping them to really articulate or detect first and then articulate their purpose and embed it into their culture, and then to train them into becoming inspirational leaders to be able to create the environment that today's workforce really wants.
That's great. So making this tangible often involves measurement. And there are obviously some experts in the field on this, but share with us, how can we measure corporate purpose, and how can we use these measurements to improve, the sort of purpose of the organization and the perception of the purpose of the organization?
Yeah, one of the great things about hosting the podcast, as you know, is I read my guest books cover to cover. That becomes a lot of the research for me and my ongoing evolution of how I practice my own craft. And so I really learned about measuring purpose from Dr. Carlos Rey in Barcelona. He has an organization that is really bent on this and also has developed some metrics around it that I hadn't seen before either, and have now since started to incorporate myself. But really what it comes down to is, what we can do is we can measure the experience of purpose in organizations. And so what that comes down to is, when first, of course, making sure that we really fully articulate the purpose into the organization, so that people really understand it. That's with their heads, of course, and then they feel it with their hearts and they do something with their hands. And so what that means is we can actually just simply ask 3 simple questions to employees to gauge the experience of purpose and how it's actually being lived in the organization. And the first one is really, how are managers behaving? To what extent are managers behaving in a way that reflects the organizational purpose? And that's an easy thing, whatever it is, 1 to 10 or whatever it is. And then the second question is, to what extent do I, as the employee, feel that the organizational purpose aligns with my own values? Can I really relate to this? Mm-hmm. And then the third measure is, to what extent do I see my colleagues living the purpose of the organization? Now I see how it's being cascaded throughout. And those 3 simple questions will tell you so much about the extent to which You are really living your purpose as an organization and therefore deriving all the value that you can from doing so.
Hmm. That's great. Yeah, I like it. Three simple questions is very manageable, very easy to get people to answer. So you talk a lot about a culture of gusto, which to me is a very powerfully way to describe something. What do you mean by a culture of gusto, and how does this affect people up and down the organization?
Mhm. So first, I have to confess where that came from, and I love how you say my company because that's exactly how I intended. Gusto now. That's exactly right. So because I
Hmm.
lived in Madrid first in my mid 20s, and of course I learned Spanish much better while I was there, and I learned the culture there, Greg. And the culture is it's so demonstrative, right? Everybody's kissing, everybody's connected, and it's this beautiful culture of connection. So and then when I moved to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I got into that culture, it's about communication and the way people talk, which is a lot of the way they have to have their hands on each other. So this I learned relationship in Spain and I learned communication in Brazil. And so gusto happens to mean about the same thing in Spanish, Portuguese, and English, and that it means like zeal, enthusiasm, zest, determination.
Hmm.
Well, those are the kinds of things that I want to help organizations to create in their culture. I want that, and that shows up as alive, invigorated people that are persisting. That's the kind of cultures that I'm helping organizations create. And so, whether you want to call it gusto, the English version, or gusto, the Spanish or Portuguese version, that's what we're out to do: is create those enlivened cultures.
That's really great. I have a little related side story I'd like to just share. So I wrote something about this in my book, but when we work with companies, we often find that they're like overly conservative or overly concerned. They're more worried about doing something wrong than they are excited about doing something right. And it leads to underinvestment in the future. It leads to lots of bad things. And some of this came from the fact that's the backlash to Enron, WorldCom, Bernie Madoff, all those things that happened around the same time. And then there all sorts of both regulation, but also risk management, came into play. And like often happens when the pendulum swings, it swings too far, and people now are almost afraid to do things. And when I first saw the term culture of gusto, I thought that's exactly what most of these companies need. I mean, they're all this introverted, they're sort of shy and they're afraid to take the next step and so forth. And it's kind of the opposite of what you've described in your experience in Madrid and Rio.
Yeah, just yesterday I was finishing a session for a company here in Dallas and helping them. They had some trust issues, and we were working on that. And then I gave them I finished it with let me show you what it looks like to have a vibrant culture and lead it through inspirational leadership. And I did the whole presentation. There was a lot of the gusto in there, and I did see them, start to get bigger in their chairs and to come back this. But they're also the big wide eyes, like, "Wow, you want us to do this? Yes, I want you to do this."
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. I can see how that would come just having watched you speaking in public and so forth. So another thing you talk about is making an organization into a destination workplace. I guess if you could describe what a destination workplace is, and then how can the work that you do lead to an organization becoming one, that would be good.
Mm. Yeah, I started using that term probably a couple years ago, Greg, and it really speaks to what I'm really out to help happen in the world, right? I want work to be a playground. I want it to be a place where people are just really looking forward to coming to. They come alive. And so a destination workplace really speaks to it's a term that describes an organization that is really irresistible to people who want to come to work there because they're known to live their purpose. They're known to do something that matters that to get they're doing it together as a combined and connected team. They are going to learn and become better versions of themselves as humans. They're going to become higher versions of themselves in their career. They're going to be led by emotionally intelligent managers who know how to give them valuable feedback that helps them grow without diminishing them. And this is where they can actually make their home. So it's a place where people can't resist, come do their best, call home, and don't want to leave.
That's great. So the culture of organizations is changing as different generations sort of phase in and phase out of the workforce, and a lot's been changing in recent years and decades. Do different generations react to purpose differently? And because of the way the younger generations tend to react stronger in general, does this mean that the need to worry about the purpose of the organization is going to become increasingly important over
I'm going to
time?
give that an emphatic yes, and let me tell you why. So first, if we just go back to that little thing that we went through called the COVID pandemic, one of the things that happened out of that is it really gave people a tremendous pause. And whatever age you were, people started reflecting on the quality of their lives and their work experiences. And a lot of people realized that how I'm spending my day at work is not really working for me anyway. It doesn't work with the rest of my life. So we already have that consideration that people already were leaning toward more meaning and more purpose just as a general rule. However, though, when you factor in the newest generations, Gen Y, which is also known as millennial, and Gen Z, the youngest, what we find is that the Gen Y, they came into the workplace already really wanting to be more true to their values. I want to be me at work. I don't want to do things that go against my value system. And so they already were coming into the place where they wanted something meaningful that aligned with their values. Now we have Gen Z coming in who insists on meaningful work and being part of an organization that they feel that they can be proud of, that they're doing something in the world that actually matters. And if they don't find that, they're really happy to go elsewhere, and they do vote with their feet. And so when you consider that by 2030, 74% of the workforce will be comprised of Gen Y and Gen Z, it becomes a business imperative to activate meaning and purpose in your culture if you want to stay relevant and have somebody who actually wants to work for you.
Just a side note, just based on the way you described that, why do you think the older generations didn't value this as much?
Great question. I happen to think that every generation has made us better as we've gone. I am not one of those people who subscribe to the idea of, oh my gosh, this next generation, we're going to whatever version we say, heck in a handbasket here on this podcast. I happen to see that the boomers really helped us in the silent generation before. They gave us that really solid footing of they plugged in, they gave their decades of service, and then they retired, and there was a sense of responsibility that came with that, and purpose wasn't on the horizon. Neither was really meaning. You did things to be able to make a career for yourself, to provide for your family. What's interesting and fascinating for me, Greg, is that I see this as very much the evolution of our human consciousness. And so we're literally
Mhm.
being pulled upstairs by each of these generations coming through the workforce. And so prior, it just wasn't on anybody's radar to want for these sorts of things. And each time, what's interesting, each time a new generation comes into the workforce, the one before is like, I had it a lot harder than you. You have to pay your dues like I did. And their next one is like, but really, do I have to? Like, for example, the Gen Y came in and they said, did you guys get the memo that you don't have to work 80 hours a week? It really isn't necessary, right? So I think it's just a really wonderful illustration of our evolution.
That's great. So, are there any really good case studies that you can share of where a company has really embraced a very sound purpose and really used it as an important part of their strategy?
I want to share a couple of examples. One I know fairly well because I had him on my podcast several years ago. Hugh Welsh is the president and general counsel of an organization called DSM and the North American version. And they have started off, I think, gosh, over 150 years ago. They were called Dutch State Mines. They were actually a mining company, and they've evolved tremendously over time. But now what they've come to is they're a global leader in health, nutrition, and bioscience. They have about 30,000 employees around the world. But their whole thing is they've kind of repurposed their acronym to DSM. They're out of the Netherlands, and they really focused on do something that matters, which I just think is fantastic. But when you start looking at their whole focus is really on bringing progress to life, and they do that by combining the essential, desirable, and sustainable. And so they have values that include shape the future, be a force for good, own the outcome. It's just really incredibly strong, and they do manage, people, planet, purpose, kind of through that lens. But
Mhm.
what's really great about them is they really do, they are that beacon, that siren that's calling people. After I had Hugh on the show and I put his episode out on social media, I had people reaching out saying, can you connect me to DSM? I really want to work for that organization. They've been on our radar for years, kind of thing. So just really, and they're really mindful about that, really mindful about living their purpose and really trying to be a force for good. So that's one
Mhm.
that I want to really evangelize and share. And then the other one that I just want to share that I've recently come across through some of my research, is a Mexican bakery called Bimbo. And Bimbo has 130,000 employees around the world, and they have presence in about 33 countries. But one of the things that I found really remarkable about them, Greg, is that their original founder understood the idea that a company has a soul made up of the souls of each of its workers. So they have this onboarding system where when a new person starts, they go through a program to help those individuals, those newly hired individuals, to understand the purpose of Bimbo and then to start to work to align and discover their own purpose and their own values to see how they can connect with that of Bimbo and therefore live it or feel enlarged by that. And I don't know of too many organizations that have that kind of a commitment. It's one thing to be able to identify your own purpose as an organization. That's fantastic. But to take it the next step and then now really offer the opportunity for your employees to do the same and be connected to that, I think that is stupendous.
Well, that's really great. Those are two great examples. Thank you for sharing them. So we've spoken about this mostly in the context of the organizational level. What does all this mean for the individual that's working in an organization that has, I'll say, good or bad purpose? Can I say that? Good or bad purpose? Is that?
Yeah, purpose is always at the end of the day. It's every organization has a purpose. The question is to the extent to which they're really aware of it, and are they really using it to its full advantage. But the question you want to know is about the individuals in the organization?
Yeah, how this relates to the individual.
Yeah, so, I really increasingly am so aware of this in my own research and my work, Greg, is, people crave mattering. They want to know that they're making a difference in their lives are worth something, the way that they're spending their days at work, which is oftentimes away from loved ones, is worth it. And so when they start to recognize that they can actually see that their work has utility, it's connected to something important, that matters or that has some value and utility to it, that is enlivening for them. And in fact, as a logotherapist, you brought that up before. So logos is Greek for meaning. So really, it's vitalizing through meaning is what that really is all about. And what I've come to understand myself is that we as humans, when we're just consuming life, as great as that is, for the vast majority of people, that is not satisfying. It's not fulfilling. We humans need to be of service to be our best. When we stop being of service is when we start getting apathetic and we start actually going into demise. So when individuals can really recognize the extent to which they feel like they're doing something that matters, and Zach Mercurio has a way of talking about mattering where one part is I know that I'm valued because you know who I am, what I do, and what I bring to the table, and I also know that I'm valued because you tell me about how my work has made a difference to the organization. So when people can feel that, when they know that, because it's being communicated by emotionally intelligent managers and leaders who know how to recognize and communicate in this way, work becomes a much more meaningful part of life and not just something that they have to do to get their paycheck.
That's great. That's really good. What about other stakeholders like customers, vendors, communities where an organization operates?
Who needs those? Greg, who needs those? So what's really great is, one of the things that I've seen organizations do really well is when they really do what I have this practice called visioneering for a greater purpose. And I like to help them create what's called a parliament of purpose. And the reason I call it a parliament of purpose really quick is I love owls, and what a group of owls, you have a flock of hens, you have a murder of crows, all these sort of things. But a group of owls is called a parliament. So a parliament of purpose for me is when organizations learn how to really assemble and meaningfully connect all of their stakeholders, their suppliers, their employees, people in the community, and certainly their customers to their purpose. And so what happens is now they really have this, literally all systems are going in the same direction. That train is fully stoked and moving down the tracks. Think about that. If you can actually get your suppliers to understand this is our purpose, and they see, gosh, that relates to, and I see how that extends or connects to ours, and you do that with all your other stakeholder communities. Now, can you see how much more dynamic that is than just you're just telling them what to do and expecting them to serve you? And so now you start to see that this notion of a very unified stakeholder community is everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction. It's powerful.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen? And feel free to do this on a no names
Well, I
basis.
think some of the mistakes, are, let's just put into the camp of people that are trying to do something about purpose. And that is very common. Organizations will get the idea, yep, I get the purpose thing. And then they assemble a group of executives and they together decide how to describe the purpose. And then they put it on a plaque and they issue it into maybe an email or something, and they put them on the walls, etc. Nobody has any idea what they really mean. They're not at all connected to it. They've been issued to them. The
Mhm.
better approach is when you involve all of the employees to help to detect and articulate that, for what I like to call the wildlife scratching, to render it together. Then it becomes a part of something that they've created together. And they're the ones on the front line that are living it anyway. So they might need to be able to be a bit more informed as to where we are really trying originally to go to, but they are the ones living it. So that's the first one, is when it gets just edict by edict, if you will, delivered. Another one is also just when it's just really something that they have put on the website or something, as I know we're supposed to do this purpose thing. So they've got a purpose statement on their website and might even still be on the walls, but nobody even references it. And so what you'll notice with that, Greg, is when you ask somebody inside the organization, what's your purpose? They'll say this, just a sec. I know there's a plaque here somewhere, then they go looking for it.
Yeah.
I think also just one is just simply ignoring it. It's just silly stuff. We don't need to do that. That's really, hokey stuff. I don't. It's we're here to make money and line our pockets basically. And this is not to say that a profit isn't absolutely wonderful and incredibly sexy. It is, right? We want that. And the way we do it today is really important. And so those are just a couple of things that I've seen organizations do wrong. And then also the last thing would be just really not really monitoring it, and like we were saying before at the beginning of the show, measuring it and seeing how does it actually show up? Where do we need to tweak it? Where did it fall off? When you bring on new managers and new employees, you're going to start to dilute that if you're not really actively engaging and managing it.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I see some organizations that try to do things go awry because of just the way they do it. And one example I run into fairly regularly is the board has determined that they need to have some of the incentive compensation based on ESG factors, let's say. And they pick two things to measure. The number of women or the percent of women in managerial positions, and something else, some other measure, both of which are valid, good things to measure, but they're like two of 100. And what you get is they do really well on those measures and don't pay attention to the other 98. It's not a very complete measurement. They check the box that they've now done something that is beyond just worrying about financials. But the companies that really embrace doing having a good purpose and doing good things for all of their stakeholders and wrapping them together, like you've pointed out. We've published several research pieces, which I know you're aware of, that firmly show that the companies that are living a good solid purpose produce better profitability, more growth, better share price performance for the public companies. They're valued at higher multiples of earnings. When the Business Roundtable in 2019 said the purpose of the organization is no longer just to satisfy shareholders, but it's to satisfy all stakeholders. If you could go back, you can't go back, but if you could go back on LinkedIn and look at all my posts right after that happened, I was posting on a comment on everybody who wrote about it. Good CEOs already knew they had to care about their employees, they had to care about their customers, they had to care about their communities. And that's how they deliver strong growth and good profitability. It's not at the expense of strong growth and good profitability. I don't think it's bad to have the statement that the Business Roundtable made, because so many people did get it
Yeah.
wrong and thought short-term profits were all that mattered, and they sacrificed other stakeholders. But that's not a problem with the economy we live in. That's a problem of people just not understanding how their bread is buttered, as they
Right.
say. Just for a little bit of fun at the end here, I know you have views on this, and so I've been saving this for the end. Would you share with our audience your views on forced return to work, which is a big topic right now, of course, in many ways?
Yeah, let's emphasize the word forced, shall we? So, the first thing I just want to say is I think it really indicates a grasping back to a previous time, to a workforce that no longer exists. And so it's futile. It's really futile. I mean, it's so clear that a good 65% of the workforce wants some kind of flexibility in how, when, and where they do their work. I just last week, Greg, had on a woman named Mana Morales talking about the flexibility paradigm, her book. And if you're not convinced after even just thumbing through that book, it's a good idea, I don't know how to help you. But when you start looking at how flexibility allows you to be able to attract, engage, and retain a much more diverse workforce, people that have maybe a longer commute, people that are caring for loved ones, maybe people that have some disabilities that prevent them from getting into the workplace very easily. All kinds of different kinds of people that have other things they want to also pursue in their lives that make them maybe want to work on a or a part-time basis or different hours. So the diversity call, the benefit there is incredible. Engagement, more and more people are just reporting, I'm more productive at home. I don't have all the distractions. I can apply myself when I'm really, really focused and present. So engagement is another one, a tremendous advantage. And then if you just look at the sustainability, we were just talking about that earlier. When you don't have people getting in their cars in traffic, you obviously reducing the carbon footprint of the organization, as well as the emissions, all these sort of things. There's so many good things that come of that. Now, what's the problem is, I think a lot of organizations are forcing the return because one, they're just trying to go back to what used to work, and they're just trying to get their bearings, and they think it's if there's any engagement problem or any communication problem, they think it's because of flexibility, and it's not. It's because they didn't have a firm plan and they did not execute and develop the culture to support it and sustain it. And so, yes, I have very, very, very strong views about that. In fact, one other thing that Morales says that I completely agree is when you force people back to the office 5 days a week, 100% of the time, you are limiting the human potential of those humans. And I, of course, can't stand for that.
Okay, that's. I think we're going to call it there. I really appreciate you joining me. We've been speaking with Alise Cortez. Thank you, Alise, for joining me for this very important conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been amazing to talk to you.
You have been listening to Create More Value, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, and I am your host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Fortuna Advisors helps companies with strategy, capital deployment, business management, corporate culture, and incentive compensation, all aimed at driving top quartile total shareholder return and the equivalent for private companies. To learn more, contact us at info@fortuna-advisors.com.